Hello everyone. It's about time for another Life Engine update. I actually think most of my subscribers now come from my AI video, so a brief recap of what the Life Engine is. It's an evolution simulation, and it allows these virtual organisms that live in this grid world to compete with each other, to grow and to reproduce, and to eat food and to eat each other. It's made up of these square cells, and organisms occupy these cells, and they are made up of different colored cells. Different colored cells do different things for the organism. You can make your own organism in this little editor thing here, and you can also play around with the evolution controls to make different kinds of environments. A new parameter has been added as of today, so you can check that out at thelifeengine.net. If you're interested in learning more how it works, you can watch the full video that explains the entire thing. I have a Discord community for this and other projects, and recently we had a competition for people to make their own worlds and organisms, which are now featured in the official version of the Life Engine. We'll get to those in a bit, but first, a little community update. Alright, fan art. I've been dying to show these off for a while. Most of them were made several months ago, but I love them all. These are depixelated organisms from the Life Engine, concepts of what the little block creatures would look like. And there's also a fair amount of art made directly in the game itself, which is a special type of dedication since it would be way easier to just make them in Paint, but they're great. Shout out to my mod Works for hosting these art competitions and other community things, and just shout out to the mods in general for keeping the server from burning down. I'm not always the most active on the server, but the community is great, and I love that there are people who like the Life Engine enough to make fan art of it. And speaking of art, I've recently added Midjourney to the Discord server. Midjourney is an AI image generator that allows anyone to make any image from any prompt they can think of, and the AI will do its best to deliver. We're doing a little community experiment on the server where we're trying to evolve life with Midjourney. Check out the welcome channel in the Pick Breeder category to learn more, or you can just generate whatever you'd like in the AI image channels. Note that you only get about 25 images for free, so use them wisely. Okay, back to the Life Engine. A few months ago there was an update that allowed you to save and load your own worlds and organisms, so I'll show you how to do that real quick. Here in World Controls you go to the Save and Load buttons down in the bottom right, or in the editor you can create your own organism. I'll just make something simple here with a mover and an eye, and you can press this Save button down here and bingo! Dino DNA, you have the save file of the organism, which is effectively the DNA of the organism, and you can use this save file to load it back up, pressing this button down here. You can share these save files on the Discord server, and recently I ran a competition for people to submit their own worlds and organisms, which have now been added to the official version of the Life Engine. Just press this Community Creations button up here, which will open the Community Creations panel, and you can load up a number of different custom-made organisms and worlds. This is my submission, the Hunter, the classic invasive species. As you can see, it's spreading pretty quickly. And I'm also going to load up the Small Bush Killer, which is another submission that's very similar to the Hunter and does a very similar job, so I'm also adding that. You can watch the two compete. And they both do a pretty good job of wiping out the current environment. Alright, let's go ahead and add in the classic purple flower, which should help stabilize this environment. So if we add that in a couple spots, we can see that it's starting to grow and survive. This was also my submission. But we can also add this new Rosas Finalis, the final rose, which is another organism that is sort of like the purple flower. It's just a producer with a bunch of red killer cells on the corners, and it outcompetes everything. It's an incredibly good organism at surviving. We can watch it as it outcompetes the purple flower, it outcompetes the hunter, it pushes everything out of the way. It is a very dominant species. But what we can do is we can load up the Quadratus Anxius, the anxious square. This organism is kind of the perfect symbiotic organism with the rose. It's just a square that runs away from everything except for food. And it has a bunch of eyes, and you can see it's just sort of jittering around, avoiding running into the final rose. I really like this relationship. It looks kind of goofy, but it's super effective, and it will basically dominate every ecosystem with at least the default simulation controls. I like how they kind of bunch up on the edge there. Okay, let's go ahead and load up something very different, the Flycatcher. This is a sort of experimental organism. It is designed to be really good at catching these flies, these little tiny organisms, little tiny mover organisms. And if we kind of zoom in here, and I'm going to have to slow this down a bit actually. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see that when it rotates, it occasionally catches a fly in its insides. It's a sort of quirk of how rotation works in the Life Engine. Ooh, there, it just caught one. I don't know if you can see it. It's hard to demonstrate, but that's what's happening. It's rotating into the organism and catching it in its sort of inner spot that kills and then immediately eats the organism. It's super cool. It's unfortunately not a very effective organism at surviving. If you place it into basically any ecosystem, it will immediately be outcompeted. It's too big and it's too sort of clunky to survive, but I wonder if there's a way to get it working better. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, let's go ahead and load up some other very different organisms. These last two organisms are the Locket and Napoleon. These are both the winners of the contest hosted by Worxt. That was essentially a BattleBot contest where you pit two organisms against each other, and their goal is not to eat or reproduce, it's just to kill the other organism. So you'll notice these organisms don't have any mouths. But in this world, we can pit the two against each other multiple times in different spots and just kind of watch them fight. They're both pretty good at not getting killed, so they sort of dance around each other a lot. But occasionally, they will intersect and end up killing the other. I think the Locket is starting to pull forward. It's gotten 2 kills, although Napoleon just got 1 kill. And that's another win for the Locket. Yeah, well, you get the idea. You can run this on your own time if you want to see which one generally beats the other. But let's go ahead and load up some worlds. Now, all of the organism submissions were accepted, but we had enough worlds that I wanted to do some voting to see which worlds were the favorites. And in the end, only the top voted worlds were selected to be in the official version of the Life Engine. So in first place, we have Colony by Worxt. This is a fairly small environment where these big mover organisms will run around and run into each other, get stuck, and form these big sort of, they look like colonial groups here. I believe it's called colony because the green producer cells on these organisms will produce food that is eaten by their neighbors that they are sort of intersecting with. And it sort of just looks like a big bacteria colony or something. It's very cool. It's uncommon to see colonies evolve in the Life Engine, mostly because they're kind of vulnerable to other organisms taking advantage. But this is a decently stable ecosystem in which these organisms exhibit colonial behavior. Okay, let's load up Ephemeral World. This is called Ephemeral World because the lifespan multiplier is 6.7. It is super, super low. These organisms do not last for a very long time. You can tell. You can watch them spawn and then immediately despawn. And they're big organisms, which means they should last for a long time, but the multiplier is so low that it doesn't matter. Nonetheless, this ecosystem survives pretty darn well, and I believe it was evolved naturally just by playing around with the evolution controls. Okay, let's load up Trailblazer. This is pretty self-explanatory. It just kind of looks cool. These organisms are running through a world absolutely full of food, and they look pretty neat. I don't know what else to say about this one. I like it. It's pretty mesmerizing. Okay, now for Scarcity. This environment looks quite a bit like Ephemeral World. It's sort of made up of these anxious square-looking things and producers, and it's called Scarcity because the probability of producing food is 0.5, which is extremely low. It means that there is very, very little food that is being produced by these producer organisms. And despite this, the ecosystem is still thriving. It's doing really well. I believe this was also evolved naturally, which is very impressive given just how harsh this environment is. Alright, now for High Def Sweepers. This was made by fellow YouTuber AlejoLab, and it's also pretty self-explanatory. These organisms just sweep on through this environment made of food, and it's very satisfying to watch. And I like to turn on the rotation so that the organisms can start rotating around and you get this sort of windshield wiper effect as the organisms clear out big chunks of food. Very satisfying. Alright, and now for Shrub Swamp. Shrub Swamp is a really interesting environment because it is made up entirely of these producers. And these producers are sort of perfectly formatted that they can intersect with the food left over from their companions. They don't depend on movers to clear the dead organisms, and they just intersect perfectly with the food and immediately eat it and then reproduce. It's a very efficient system. However, it is vulnerable to an invasion of hunters. If you drop them into the world, you can see that they pretty quickly start to dominate and clear out the shrubs. Very sad. I like to see which of these worlds are vulnerable to invasions of hunters or other invasive species. What would it take to break the system? So that's something fun that you can run if you want to try that out. Okay, let's go ahead and load up the life engine of Nurgle. I think this is a Warhammer 40k reference. It has something to do with the organisms, these little organisms inside this big organism that feed it and all of the little organisms inside. It's kind of a cool design. It looks to me like a cell, made up of all the different organelles and inner parts. And if you remove this wall here, you should be able to see the organisms, speed it up, should be able to see the wall organisms starting to grow and spread. So you can kind of tell what this thing is made up of. Yeah, so I like the aesthetic of this. It looks pretty cool. Alright, now on to the main event, the Organism Computer, made by Mixer. This is an entire computer made out of organisms in the Life Engine. Uh-oh, looks like we have some bugs here, Mixer. Just kidding, I added those. You can see all the different sections of the computer that allow it to run any arbitrary code. It even has little comments made out of organisms, which is just wonderful. This is essentially the same thing as like a redstone computer in Minecraft, and it can be programmed to run anything. So we have here a computer programmed to run the Fibonacci sequence, or to compute the Fibonacci sequence. Now, these comments explain exactly what this computer does. So first, it will compute the Fibonacci sequence, which you can do with a fairly simple computer program. And then it will run a little loading bar animation, and then it will repeat. So how does that work? Well, let's take a look at the out section here. This is a binary string where an organism that is down is 1 and an organism that is up is 0. So the program can output any binary code with 8 bits. So let's go ahead and center this and speed it up here. And we can watch it start to compute the Fibonacci sequence. So off it goes. I'm putting the number that the binary code corresponds to right there on the right, and you can see that it is computing the Fibonacci sequence. Super cool. And then it does this little loading bar animation where the whole thing goes one by one, and then after that it repeats. So how do the individual bit organisms communicate with the rest of the program? Well, if you take a look at them, you'll see that one of these organisms is connected. It's actually a very big organism with a huge gap in it, and it is connected up to the data memory, which is this section right above it, which is then connected to basically the other pieces of the computer via the logic of eyes. Most of the logic of this computer is computed with the logic of how eyes see and the decisions that eyes make. And you can kind of see all the different systems that are required for making a computer. I'm not a Redstone programmer myself, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details here, but this is open for anybody to go check out and mess around with, and it's incredibly impressive and just super cool, and I love to just let it run and watch it. It's just so cool. I'm very impressed with, I'm impressed with my entire community, to be honest. Now, it's worth mentioning that other people have done work with computers in the Life Engine. Maximal Megaminx made a binary adder, and there are other kind of cool contraptions that are in the works and that were foundational to this computer, as well as there's probably fan art and other projects and things that people have made that I just haven't seen. There is just so much cool stuff on the Discord server that it's basically impossible for me to show it all off. So I apologize if anything is missing credit where credit is due. But I am so happy with the community for continuing to be invested in the Life Engine, for continuing to innovate and to make new things, and I'm just so impressed with the work that has been done. I also want to encourage people to continue to submit things. Just head on over to the submissions channel in the Life Engine category and upload your save files for worlds or organisms. And I'm not sure if I will do another competition or if I will just have to make a decision about which ones will be added moving forward. I don't know exactly what the plan is, but I will do something with these submitted worlds and organisms. Thank you to everyone who submitted something for this competition, and thanks to everyone who watches and supports me on Patreon. It helps me out a lot. Until next time.